Once upon a time, there was a new crossover that refused to play by the rules. It flipped the script and made all the others look like fools. Featuring styling that's sexier by far and handles like a rock star. Introducing the first ever Toyota CHR.
Enjoy agile handling in the body of a seductive crossover that comes with standard 18-inch alloy wheels. The first ever Toyota CHR. The perfect ride to spin your own tail. Toyota. Let's go places.
Blog Talk Radio.
Yeah.
TV party tonight! TV party tonight! TV party tonight! TV party tonight! We're gonna have a TV party tonight! Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight. All right. We'll pass out on the couch. All right. Tonight. We got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews.
Don't talk about anything else. We don't want to know. We're gonna miss our favorite shows. And tonight our favorite show is, I hit the button a little early there. Sorry, folks. Not like anyone cares. This is TV Party Tonight, and the show we are gathered around the set to view is the Netflix documentary series in 3 parts. 5 Came Back. This brings us to our glorious conclusion to all things military on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. And I am your host, currently doing my impression of one of the characters from The Hateful Eight as I wrap myself up in blankets like I'm in a Wyoming blizzard. It's July. I'm in an air-conditioned house in Florida, and I can't regulate my temperature. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my life. Anywho, I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And joining me tonight to talk about 5 Came Back is our paragon of Canadian virtue, our military historian in his own right, the man with a Canadian plan, Mr. Andrew Graham. How do you do, sir?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you doing?
I believe I just explained how I was doing.
Well, I hope you're doing better then.
I went in the pool today with the kids, and, at some point, you got to get busy living or you're going to get busy dying. And so despite my condition, as it were, I got in the pool, and I didn't use sunblock because fuck sunblock. That's what I say. And, we spent only a couple of hours out in the pool, and some of the pool is shaded at my in-laws' house. Some of it's not so much. It's right out there in the sun. But I got a little color. I'm looking a little red man. And that in combination with exhaustion, in combination with condition, in combination with they keep this house at roughly 35 below zero, that's a little chilly. I'm a little chilly, Andrew Graham. I'm a little chilly. Chilly Willy the Penguin.
That's fair. I got to look something up now. Just to see. I'm just trying to remember what the conversion is between Fahrenheit and Celsius.
I was exaggerating. All right. TV Party Tonight is going to be kind of a split 7-inch. Okay? For those of you who remember vinyl records from back in the day, though I say that, but the hipsters still use vinyl, so it's not like people don't know what I'm talking about. But in case you're one of these people who really has no earthly clue what a split 7-inch is, what a 12-inch single, what vinyl is, what a record is, what a record player is, if you're just like, I do Spotify, please move this on. When I say a split 7-inch, I am referring, in fact, to a record that is split between 2 bands. The 7-inch single on side A is, say, the Sex Pistols. On side B, be another, be the New York Dolls or something. In any case, we're going to do sort of a split 7-inch tonight, as TV Party and Because You Made Me are going to merge tracks and become Devastator.
Please tell me the original
Gra-
Devastator and not the Bay Devastator.
No. This is the Devastator from the cartoons. I don't acknowledge, the thing with the wrecking balls in the second Transformers movie. That's horseshit.
Oh, thank God.
So I'm about to turn this podcast over to the paragon of Canadian virtue in just a moment. But Andrew Graham, he came to me a little ways back when we did Romans Week here on the Rattledge and Broadcasting Network, and he said, Rattledge, we need to do a documentary series on Netflix. And immediately my eyes glazed over. As Robert Winfrey knows, I'm not a dumb man, but it sometimes takes a little bit to engage me in the higher pursuits of intellectual learning. And 41, I just don't feel like changing. Anyway, change. Andrew Graham said, hey, there's a great series on Netflix. It's called Five Came Back. And I knew that we were going to be reviewing Dunkirk, and I said, why don't we, the week that we review Dunkirk, have you back on? And we can discuss the 3-part documentary series. Now, why am I going through this preamble? Why all this house cleaning? Because You Made Me's format is basically I turn the reins over to the guest host. TV Party Tonight operates mostly the same way as Damn You Hollywood or source material. We find some content, we review it, we give feedback, and then we're done. Though with Damn You Hollywood, there's a little gimmickry at the end. Tonight, like I said, this may be a TV party, but Andrew Graham made me watch this goddamn thing. So this is his TV party. He made me watch it. He gets to lead the discussion. Are you ready, sir? Are you ready for the burden? The glorious burden?
Ready as I'm going to be. Ain't no party like a TV party.
All right. With that said, I'm going to give a little introduction here, and then I am going to turn it over to you to lead us through tonight's discussion of Five Came Back, which is an American documentary based on the 2014 book Five Came Back, A Story of Hollywood if she could, and the Second World War by journalist Mark Harris. It was released as a standalone documentary in New York and Los Angeles and is a 3-part series on Netflix. So the 3 episodes are titled The Mission Begins, which looks at the backgrounds of the 5 directors that the documentary series features. Then there's Combat Zones, which is when it really starts getting good, by the way. I don't want to make it sound like I was like, ugh, with this thing. No, I really got into the second episode. And then The Price of Victory, yes. What happens when we finally got to the end of this war? What happened in the Nazi death camps, and then what happened with these directors when they gave up the military and they had to return to the lives of just good old-fashioned filmmakers. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna throw you this little talking point, and then I'm gonna let you take me for a ride. I'm gonna let you steer the car. I've never seen It's a Wonderful Life because it's black and white, and I like things that go boom and are colorful. But I will say this: with the context of what Capra was going through and the little bit of footage they showed of It's a Wonderful Life, I actually got teary-eyed. I got very emotional, understanding what his perspective was and how he was feeling. And the stuff about, especially the stuff about PTSD and soldiers, really hit home with me, being someone who works in the mental health field. So I've rambled long enough. I was going to go into a bit of context as far as how did we get to the place in the world where we needed documentaries to sort of motivate the average American to enter World War II. But I want to hear from you. I want you to lead the discussion. And if you want to come back to that, then I will go ahead and give my historical synopsis as I saw it.
All right, sounds good. I'm actually going to perfectly admit this to you right now, Mark. When I actually recommended that we watch this series, I don't think it had actually come out yet. So I was kind of throwing this one at you with a bit of faith. So, I saw a trailer for it. I saw what it was about. So World War II, bunch of classic filmmakers, and it had guys like Spielberg, Del Toro, Francis Ford Coppola, all these guys talking about this, and it kind of hooked me from there, and I decided to give it a watch. Now, one thing that kind of colored my review on this is that, and actually it makes me feel better because I know you're always talking about the 70s movies, but a lot of the kind of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s film lore, and specifically these directors, I'm not really all that familiar with. The only one I'm really familiar with is Capra, and that's basically by way of It's a Wonderful Life, which, I mean, it is what it is, but it's a great movie, and it definitely can get to you. So I would recommend you give that a watch this Christmas when you get a chance. So
I will.
In any case, and you'll pardon me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold, but I mean, overall, it kind of covers one of those kind of side stories among what happens during a war, aside from the combat itself. I mean, war goes in a lot of different directions. You've got the combat itself, you've got the logistics involved, you've got a lot of the, you've got things that, for lack of a better word, are propaganda, and this is where a lot of this covers in. And one of the interesting things, obviously, when we're talking about either the First or Second World Wars, is how the entire, when you use the phrase total war, that's what we're really talking about. And how you mobilized everybody for whatever their skills were to contribute to the war in some fashion. Like, I mean, yeah, there's a
even if it's
example.
just open up your pocketbook and buy a bond.
Exactly. And this one's kind of interesting because I didn't realize until afterwards that, for those of you listening, they actually have, in concert with this being this documentary being released, they actually released, I think, almost all of the documentaries that were released at the same time. In fact, reading the Wikipedia, all of them actually are on there. So it's kind of interesting because you can see both, in kind of hardcore history terms, sorry, Dan Carlin, both the primary sources, which are these documentaries that they did, and then you've got the secondary source of this documentary talking about the documentaries, the filmmakers, how they came to be, their overall impact, that sort of thing.
Okay. To give people some context as to what we're talking about and the time that these folks are coming up and making propaganda films, I mean, the question that comes right out of this documentary is, why propaganda films? Why do you need them? What is their purpose? You have to remember, and I'm going to do a very, very quick 100-year lesson here in American history. Our position, our collective average American position in terms of opinion and desire to enter this meat grinder of a war starts really at the end of the Civil War. It starts with Reconstruction. It starts with a divide among a political, starts with a political divide among the North and the South. It starts with a personal divide. That's a personal divide among the people. I mean, you have to remember, we are, and I don't know if this is something you've observed about American culture, you being Canadian and all, but we are, if there's one phrase that sums up the American conscience, it's "get off my lawn, leave me the hell alone." And for the longest time, that was a defining quality of the American discussion, was, hey, you Brits, leave us the hell alone. Hey, you Northerners, leave us the hell alone. This was on and on. So, you have, in the wake of Reconstruction, all these political and personal divides among people, making for a powder keg of violence, which is a whole other discussion. I'm not going to get into it. Just know that it's informing a lot of the national conversation, such as it is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We're no sooner into the 1900s and where the world is involved in the last Great War. And we're late to that one as well because we, as I said, we have just gotten over. And when I say just, I understand the Civil War was, decades prior. But you have to remember how long these things take, how long Reconstruction was. We were, and jump in if you want to participate or if you disagree with what I'm saying, Andrew. This is my impression from the history that I've read. We were in no mood for nothing in terms of Reconstruction. It was a matter of putting this country back together in a time where half of the country really wanted to see the other half put to death. This was not a happy place.
I would actually say that just on at least one book I recently read, which was I can't remember the author's name, but the biography of Alexander Hamilton. I'd say kind of the American struggle with whether or not to get involved in foreign entanglements goes all the way back to the post-revolution, where there's this whole conversation about whether or not that doesn't. I mean, it kind of always continues through, and yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I think everyone struggles with. I mean, in Canada, we have a slightly different struggle as to how do we define ourselves, like going from the First World War to the Second World War. How do we define ourselves apart from the Empire during the First, and then that turned into a movement for us to have much more control of our own foreign policy, to the point that we actually waited a week during the Second World War before we declared war on Germany, just to exercise our independent foreign policy at that point.
Yeah. Canada, not the 51st state. We got it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yes, and I would 100% agree with you. But I think in terms of the most recent event, laying out people's thoughts, it's the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and we're no sooner into the 20th century and World War I starts.
Yeah, and Mark, one thing, talking about the healing periods there, like, I mean, you could very, very easily make an argument that World War I was in some ways an extension of the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. So, I mean, that was the better part of 40 years before that happened. So it's definitely not a unique thing to happen.
No. So, so the reason why I bring that up is it's definitely one of these examples of, if you're the average Kansas farmer and, or Ohio mine worker, Pittsburgh steel man, and you're looking at the situation going, why are we involved in a Franco-Prussian war going on over there? There's a whole reason we set this country up with an ocean in between us and that continent, because we did not want to deal with that sort of thing. And so again, you have to get over this mindset of the greater good versus this idea of get off my lawn, leave us the hell alone. And I'm using a lot of colloquialisms here because we do want to get to the documentary. But World War I ends. We have the Roaring '20s, the Jazz Age, the seeds of the drug war, which was a war on blacks and Hispanics. That's a story for another day. And no sooner does the Roaring '20s start, it ends with the Great Depression. And again, if you think about modern times now, with all this information, we have a lot of people who know nothing. They are inundated with social media, but they do not have facts, and they can be led to believe just about anything. And so imagine a world where you don't have those kinds of social connections, but there are people weaving an argument of, see what alchemy brought us our doom. We get involved in foreign entanglements. We have 5 minutes of prosperity, and boom, the whole thing goes apeshit. I mean, it's not really what happened, But you can definitely lead people to the idea of, had Woody had gone to the police, this would have never have happened. Love that cartoon. In any case, the Great Depression goes and goes and goes, and then eventually we enter into World War II. But I wanted to set all that up and very, very colloquially and very quickly so that people would understand why the military would need to convince people who've just been through Reconstruction, World War I, the Roaring '20s, the drug war, as an A and B to that, the Great Depression, why they would need to be convinced, hey, make the noble sacrifice, be the greatest generation, go to Europe. Go to Europe and fight the good fight. Fight the Nazis. Or go to Japan and, fight the Japs. Or go to Africa and fight the Italians. So you would absolutely need film speaks to the masses to convince people that this is in fact a noble cause. And I am reminded of a line from the documentary, which then reminded me of Lord of the Rings, because of course everything does. To paraphrase Samwise Gamgee, civilization is a good thing and it's worth fighting for. And it's such a weird thing, and I'm going to shut up here and let you respond and take back the conversation. But it's such a weird thing that you have to remind people of that. Civilization is good, and it's worth fighting for. Why there's such a strong resistance from the get-off-my-lawn people to that idea is something I haven't really thought about, but it makes me scratch what's left of the hair on my head.
There's another side to this, and I think I'm not sure if you've ever heard this phrase before in terms of foreign policy. Have you ever heard the phrase "a fireproof house"?
Why don't you explain it?
It was actually I always thought it was more general, but it was actually a Canadian senator that came up with it. Raoul Dandurand, who I believe was French Canadian. I could be wrong on that one, but anyway, he came up with this phrase in 1924 that basically said international affairs in Canada was a fireproof house, far from inflammable materials. Basically meaning that up until basically World War II or even the 1950s, that North America was very much out of reach of the rest of the world in terms of practical concerns on, there's nobody beating down our doors to potentially invade or anything like that. And it gave some level of separation. And I think the other thing that reminded me of the whole conversation around U.S. foreign policy around intervention was, I want to say John Quincy Adams, and he made, I could be getting this totally wrong, but I know it was a former American president that made a line about America should not go out looking for foreign monsters to slay.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and that's definitely a big part of kind of the first episode, is talking about kind of justifying American entry into the war. I mean, I think from the sources I've read, FDR was definitely towards joining on the side of the Allies. I mean, there were a number of things he did. The Lend-Lease, bases for battleships. I could have that wrong, but quite a few of the trade deals basically only favored
I know that we had IBM worked with the Nazis at some point.
Trying to remember if I heard about that one or not, but a lot of it was probably, once the war itself proper started, a lot of it was definitely much more towards the side of the British. So there was a Lend-Lease program that was basically a credit program where the United States would loan money to Britain that they could then use to buy more war materials, whether it be jeeps or oil or what have you. And there was also other exchanges that were made, and basically a whole trade system that was set up prior to them formally entering the war to basically keep Britain afloat.
Ignore that. It's my phone telling me for the 8th time that I have a meeting on the August 10th.
Oh, no worries. I didn't even hear it.
Okay.
But I mean, that's kind of.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, I don't have anything to add. So I thought you were done. I was trying to transition. So please continue.
I think the other thing that maybe in the first episode of this, and I actually have this on in the background right now, is talking about the power of film at this time, either for good or ill. The Nazis in particular, and certainly with I can't remember his first name, but Goebbels, who was kind of it wasn't the title, but he was basically the Nazi propaganda minister. He ran all their propaganda, everything along that line. He hired a filmmaker named Leni Riefenstahl to do quite a few of the films, and they mentioned one, Triumph of the Will. I believe it was a she also. She also did one right before the 36 Olympics, and I mean, there was a lot of back and forth, kind of already setting things up. Like, I mean, I was just reading Joyce Carol Oates' book on boxing, and she was talking a lot about the two fights between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, who was a German boxer during the 1930s, and that very much came down to that started to turn into an analogy for basically the United States versus Nazi Germany. And there was a lot of, I think there's a little bit more of that play they could have added in, just to kind of set the stage of how important film was at the time and where the headspace was for a lot of people.
Okay. In terms of structure of the first episode, there's a lot of information. A lot of information. And now, it may be me, it may be this has not been the best week for my attention span or my health, so I'm going to let you speak on this. But I found the first episode to be incredibly dense and a little all over the place. I had a hard time really digging into the first episode. They start with a lot of the material that these people are known for after the war, and then they go back, and then there's some explanation as to propaganda films, and it seemed a little scattered. The second and third episodes seem a lot tighter, but I will say this: the first episode just seemed like it was bombarding you with information. Like,
I would agree with that.
Go ahead.
I was just about to say I would agree with that. Go ahead.
This was not a movie I could have put on passively while I was, convalescing in the bed. I needed to take notes. This is a film series that needs to be taught as a class. Because there's so much information, and you can get very much lost in what the narrative is.
Oh, agreed. I actually have episode 1 back on in the background right here, and I definitely found that too when I was getting ready to talk about this. It's like, wow, there was a lot of stuff covered in part 1 that I didn't really pick up on as much. And I mean, a lot of it actually was very specific to one of the filmmakers, George Stevens, who I think plays an increasingly large part down the line as far as things go. That said, I mean, they do hit some really interesting points as far as kind of what some of the filmmakers' work was before the war, how some of it was kind of implicitly pro-war, some of it was anti-war, some of it was a glorification. I'm just watching this one section right now on George Stevens' movie Gunga Din. But it definitely kind of spreads it around, and I mean, I think the other thing that I think affects it is where they cut the episodes as well, because to this they basically have pre-war, and then about, I'm going to say, the last 10 to 15 minutes, that's actually where you get into Pearl Harbor, that's where you get into Midway, and how all these guys kind of end up where they are doing the jobs that they do during the war. And I think that little bit of pacing kind of made it a little bit hard to track as well.
Agreed. Any burning desires or issues with the first episode that you want to get into?
I mean, I think I kind of covered it just with, again, setting a little bit more context around how film was being used and things like that. And I mean, talking about Leni Riefenstahl for a second, like you watch those films that she made, and they are, they're master propaganda pieces. They are, the best way I could describe it is that they literally look like the beginning of Return of the Jedi when you have the Imperial March going and the Emperor's coming out of the ship.
Yeah. Which,
like,
if you are looking for a modern allusion to that, go watch The Force Awakens. They
exactly.
pretty much looked at Nazi propaganda footage and went, this, shoot this.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, I think that's a lot of what they get into here is about how a lot of these directors and obviously they talk a lot about the influence that they had on modern directors, and I mean, that's kind of maybe we can stop and talk about that for a second, because they picked some really interesting guys. I mean, obviously Spielberg, who has a very strong connection to, World War II lore. His father fought in the war. You've got Paul Greengrass of the Bourne movies, and he did United 93, correct? He did that, and he did Captain Phillips. You've got Lawrence Kasdan. You've got, I believe it was Empire. You've got Francis Ford Coppola, the Godfather movies, Apocalypse Now, many other things like that. And Guillermo del Toro, of course, Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, which, actually unto itself, I've never seen it, but I think that's actually also basically a World War II movie because it's alluding to the I believe the Spanish Civil War, or maybe just after that. And also this new movie, which, what is it called? The Shape of Water or something like that? Which makes me just say, and Comer, if you're out there, if you're listening to me, you can probably agree to this. Let's see if we can wheel him up some money so he can make himself a BioShock movie, because the sensibility on that movie and that one for BioShock is very similar.
Okay. Combat Zones is episode 2. The directors learned their vision for the films is not always permissible by the U.S. government. Oh, this was by far one of my favorite things about this series. The idea of, I am a filmmaker. I am going to show you the thing, and then there's the studios going, nope. In this case, the government going, nope. No. We have a very specific thing we need you to show people, a very specific way we want you to do it. You're there you monkey, hold camera. It's like, and so you have the artist versus the boss, the eternal struggle. We talk about it on Damn You Hollywood all the time. Weiler is shocked by the racism he encounters against African-American soldiers and refused to make a film recruiting black soldiers. Meanwhile, the film's racist depiction of the Japanese versus human depiction of the Germans causes worry for the War Department, which at times planned to distribute Japanese-American population from internment camps into towns across the United States. Yeah, that's a problem. If you start to make movies, and pay attention, folks, because there's a modern allusion here. If you make movies that makes a particular group of people in the world look like monsters, when those monsters, who are not really monsters, need to come here for saving, for humanity, this causes a problem with the people who live here, who you just made the argument that they're monsters, and so why would you do this? I'm talking about Syrian refugees. Anyway. I don't mean to get political, and it's not like I have a huge, argument there, but, look at what we've been doing with a lot of the films. I mean, there's some care to create situations where Muslims are not all, one giant monster attacking the Western civilization, but they don't always do the best job. And whatever job they are doing, the message coming across loud and clear to many people, because they, selective hearing and all of that, is Muslims are monsters. Next question. This was a problem even back then, with the Japanese. So, all right, episode 2. What are some of your talking points? What are some of your thoughts? Take me for a ride, sir.
I think, you're definitely right. I mean, episode 2 really gets into the, kind of the meat of the documentary in a lot of ways. I mean, they start talking about all of the various, theaters that these guys are in, what they're doing at the time. They start talking about how they're actually getting into either, obviously marketing, for lack of a better word, marketing the war, or how they're talking about it. They, I think one of the ones that I found quite interesting was talking about, and let me just see which one it was. The Battle of San Pietro by John Huston, which talked about one of the smaller battles in Italy and getting into the contrast between showing real casualties, but then going back and restaging parts of the battle. Talking about William Wyler and his work in, I believe, 8th Air Force, doing things like the Memphis Belle. And obviously, I think a lot of people probably more associate that one with I want to say late 80s, early 90s movie with, I believe, Sean Astin in it, which is pretty good, actually. But obviously just kind of going into a lot of that, and then also addressing a lot of the early attempts with, Tunisian Victory, also by John Huston, who obviously had some conflict there with how is it trying to find the center of their story. How do they tell this versus how do the British tell it? How does it make them look? And how does it all connect that way? And then, like I said, the kind of the extended conversation is getting into the conversation around how do you talk about the war in the Pacific, and how do you deal with that subject of dehumanizing the enemy? As a quick aside, I took a 20th century American military history class when I was in university, and the professor at the time defined World War II as actually being broken down into what he called 3 basic race wars, which was the Germans versus the Russians, the Germans against the Jews, and then the Americans versus the Japanese. And all of those battles were fought on a very fundamentally racial level, right or wrong. And I mean, he went into some of this, and they allude to some of it in this episode, some of the Warner Brothers produced cartoons. And he actually showed one of the first Bugs Bunny cartoon where he uses I should have taken that left at Albuquerque. And I mean, it was, to hear Bugs Bunny saying some of those things are pretty shocking. So it definitely colors a lot of the way you approach that conflict and how you approach this conversation on how the Japanese were depicted and everything along that line.
One of the things that it gets into, and the summary alluded to it as well, is the different approaches the directors took with these films. It also talks about how these films did not do very well. These were not well received by the American public. It's all about messaging, right? And if you could respond to this, they had some difficulty with messaging early on with these films. These were not films that people wanted to see or felt like the information in the films was giving them what they needed to know. And there was a real struggle between, again, the artist, the director, wanting to present you a vision that they have concocted, that they have framed, and what is the necessity of the cause.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, and kind of relating to the Tunisian Victory documentary, I mean, that's a big part of it. I mean, I'd have to go back and rework part of it, but obviously John Huston had a lot of problems trying to get the right footage, trying to get the right narrative, trying to get the right tone to it. Well, at the same time, he was often because documentaries were being produced in concert, and Britain also had a very strong film industry at the time. You also had the British producing a very strong set of their own films and their own documentaries that were obviously being used as their own promotion to to show that they were very much leading the war effort and everything along that line.
Let me ask you a question.
Talking about sure.
What do you think was the hang-up for a lot of these directors? If you could sort of summarize, in one idea, what was holding some of these directors back early on before they really started to nail it, if one can say that they did. And, I think there's an argument to be made that eventually they did. But if you could sort of look at these 5 directors and their struggles that they were having, what was informing that struggle? What were they wrestling with and losing? In your opinion?
I think I can almost put it down to just the very simple inexperience at war at this point. And I mean that's something that always happens no matter what you're talking about, whether it be, actual combat or planning or logistics or whatever. War, as another one of my professors put it, David Berkeson, he said that war does 2 very unnatural things to people. It makes them attempt to take the life of another human being, and it makes them also put their own lives at risk. And I mean, it's always a point of experience on how you start expressing that. Like, I mean, the narrative, to compare the two, talking about maybe Britain and the United States, for Britain and for the Commonwealth, it very quickly took on a very simple narrative of survival. And I think for American filmmakers, the narrative was more complicated because you were very much kind of dragged into the war by way of Pearl Harbor and then Hitler declaring war and being for it, and it being kind of there's still being some trepidation there.
Yeah, you speak to an interesting point about the American conscience. The war never comes to continental United States. There's warnings. There's warnings in some of these films. Again, civilization is worth fighting for, and if we don't stop Hitler in Europe, Hitler will surely come to the United States. But it's the 3 little pigs. This is never going to happen. The big bad wolf is never going to blow my house down. I can build my house of sticks. I can build my house of straw, and I'll be perfectly safe. And then there's that third pig going, "No, stupid. You don't see the danger I see, and you're not prepared, and you're going to be screwed very shortly." But it's very hard to convince people of that. I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I look at, the brouhaha during the Bush administration and the Iraq War, and there was, believe it or not, everyone grabbed something sturdy to hold on to. A coherent argument made for going into Iraq and making sure that the kinds of issues that were there and could very easily spill out of the Middle East didn't. Now, it was bobbled and mishandled, and sympathy for this sort of idea died shortly on the vine, but that's neither here nor there. The point of it is there was an argument made for, if we don't attack the enemy where they are now, surely the enemy will come to us. And we have these sort of reactive moments, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, where, there's these isolated incidents where we go, oh, see, there's an example of how it can come to us. But we've never had to go through rationing, other than we have gas prices in the 70s, which was related to something else. Eddie Izzard made a joke about that in his one of his stand-up shows, where it was in the 90s or early 2000s, where he was just like, rationing just ended last week. We've never, you've never. I'm sitting here in the comfort of my in-laws' home in Tampa. I'm not worried about bombers overhead, which is
Britain
something that the Brits had to worry about.
Sorry, I was about to say, Britain only paid back its debts to the United States from the Second World War in the 1990s.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a good point right there, and I think that's absolutely right.
look at the human cost. Again, I go back to, you don't have to look outside your window and worry. I mean, we used to talk about in the Cold War, you have to hide underneath your. I don't know if you did this in Canada, but I remember in the early '80s during the Reagan administration, the old duck under your desk and hold on to your ass in case of a nuclear fire, because
we never did that, but my hometown, Ajax, Ontario, has a nuclear power station there. I remember very clearly in 1990, right around the time that the Iraq War was happening, we were doing evacuation drills.
Okay.
In case somebody tried to do something to the nuclear power plant and they had iodine pills on hand and stuff like that.
Right. But the point of fact is, to my knowledge, Canada's never been attacked from the air by bombers. Residential areas weren't laid to waste, looking like Night of the Living Dead set. There weren't areas of New York City that were strafed like they were in London. So war has never come to North America like it has in France and Europe. France and England, rather. And Germany and Russia. Hang on, because I want to make this point, because we have a tendency to, especially because of the documentary, focus on England. But does anyone ever think about what happened to the Russians?
Oh,
again, another Eddie Izzard joke. You have the Eddie Izzard joke is, Napoleon took over the world. He ran into Russia. Oh, it's a bit cold. It's a bit cold. It's a bit cold, and he runs back the other way. And then Hitler never played Risk as a kid, and then he goes, "I've got a better idea. I've got a better idea." Oh, it's the same idea. It's the same idea. It's a bit cold. It's a bit cold. But yeah, so you have this gigantic expanse of land, and the Russians burning everything as they retreat back into the Siberian wilderness. Jesus Christ! When I think. When they looked at the totals of X amount of people died from the United States, X squared died from the Allies in Britain and France, and it's like X to the 10th power in Russian deaths. It's ridiculous.
There's a really good video on Vimeo called "The Fallen of World War II" that lays out exactly that, and it actually even brings it all the way out and puts in perspective of modern conflicts. I mean, your point on Russia is absolutely dead on. I mean, the Russian people have suffered more in the past 100 years than most others have. I mean, and the thing about their casualties in World War II is that there was a tremendously large amount of civilian casualties that the Germans just kind of inflicted for the hell of it on their way through to Russia. And I mean, it's very much a big part of the story of World War II. I believe there was a statistics I once heard, and I don't know if this is right, but 7 out of 8 German soldiers who died during the war died at Russian hands.
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't have the concept of, they thought how big. They didn't think about, they think about how big Normandy was and the Battle of Normandy, going to the Falaise Gap and Ardennes and everything like that. The scale there versus the scale on the Eastern Front dwarfed it just in terms of manpower. Like, we're talking dozens of formations of armies battling each other. So it's something that not a lot of people can wrap their head around. All
right. It's that time. Burning desires, things left unsaid, points you would wish you had made earlier. It's your part of the show. Go, go, go.
I'm going to hit
Episode
up two really quick. One is going to be just talking about the Memphis Belle. I thought that was William Wyler's piece on the B-17 bomber. That one was really good, and I don't know how many people realize how dangerous flying the bombers were, either in the RAF or either in the RCAF or in the United States Army Air Corps. The casualty rates on bombers were actually, I think, worse than a lot of frontline infantry units, just in terms of the casualty rates, in terms of the chances of you coming back unscathed. And the thing is, when they get into some rather affecting stuff where they talk about some of the footage from the Memphis Belle and, the bombers going down and the guys counting the chutes to see how many guys made it off that airplane, because each one of those bombers had 10 guys on each one of them. And, you lost one of those wholesale, then you were losing 10 guys every time. The other one, and this kind of goes back to the earlier point about, the fear of invasion and things like that. And it's talking a little bit about the Aleutian Islands and a little bit of a fun kind of shared bit of Canadian American history. The Aleutian Islands was actually briefly occupied by Japan during the Second World War. So those are the islands off the south end of Alaska. And actually, at one point, a joint Canadian-American special operations force, this first special service force, also known as the Black Devils, they were made famous in a book and movie called The Devil's Brigade, where actually that was their first operation. Now, at that point, the Japanese had discovered they were untenable and had actually left, but it's kind of just a neat little footnote in Canadian-American history. And for those of you out there who are interested, do some serious research into the first Special Service Force. It is actually really kind of an interesting story and a bit of a shared heritage there.
All right, in episode 3, as we come to our conclusion, and we're going to go a little over 10 minutes here. I set the show for about an hour. I figured that would suffice, but I want to get this in, and then we'll do plugs. The Price of Victory. The 5 directors returned to Hollywood after the war, but are forever haunted by what they saw. Well, of course. Ford goes on a drinking bender after filming the carnage at D-Day, which, by the way, if for those of you who have forgotten or have not seen Saving Private Ryan, there's no earthly way to describe the horror of D-Day. The mission was to take a beach that was heavily fortified with artillery and machine guns and everything else. And while I believe there might have been air support, I mean, there's only so much air support can do when it's being shot up by artillery. And then it's just boats upon boats. It's just a sea of humanity arriving on this beach, running into gunfire, literally being mowed down. As much as we enjoy our action films, and look, I joked earlier, I like a dumb action movie as much as anybody else. But and I joked about in our G.I. Joe commentary, which I don't believe is up yet, but should be up probably tomorrow. 1 million rounds of ammunition firing in every direction and nobody gets hit. War doesn't work that way. We talked about this with Dunkirk. D-Day was a mass of humanity essentially being hit with death's sigh. Just a broad, sweeping attack. I think it was something. What they say, like 4,000 Americans. Was that? Did they get that number right?
Let me see. Overall, between all 3 American, Canadian, and British forces on the day, 4,414 dead.
Yeah.
And then probably another 6,000 wounded, missing, captured. Germans sustained anywhere between 4,000 and 9,000 casualties.
Just think about the amount of people, the amount of space 4,000 people takes up, and they died when many of them died when the ramps dropped. They never even made it off the boat. They went to boot camp. They got trained. They got their assignment. They got loaded onto a boat. That boat sailed. It landed, and they died. Shot in the face. It's
or
brutal.
They were, Band of Brothers. They were shot down before they even could jump out their planes.
Right. So, on that happy note, Stevens is wholly unprepared for the horrors of Dachau and realizes he is not there to film propaganda, but to capture evidence of crimes against humanity. Yeah, I want to talk about that for a minute. Weiler, who lost his hearing during the war, fears his career is over. Houston chronicles soldiers suffering from PTSD. We definitely need to talk about that. In the film Let There Be Light, only to have it suppressed by the U.S. government. Still suppressing it, by the way. The U.S. government is still not acknowledging that that soldiers get PTSD from combat. Just thought I'd let everyone know that we are currently sending people into the Middle East, into the grindhouse that is the Middle Eastern theater, and they're coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, like you do, and the government says, yeah, it's not a real thing. Just thought I'd share that. In any case, couple of points that obviously jumped out at me. I don't know if you've heard this, Andrew, but, this idea of, we talked before about it's never really come home for us North Americans because, the war was always over there. It's always over there. It's, even when it was over here, it was over there. It was in Pearl Harbor. And I think for a lot of people, they didn't really know what was happening with the Nazi death camps. And when a lot of soldiers saw it for the first time, there was degrees of guilt. Like, if we had only gotten involved in this war sooner, that sort of thing. I don't know if you've heard that or if you've read about it. I don't feel like I'm making that up. I feel like I've read that somewhere.
I think in a lot of cases it was shock, it was justification. There's been a lot of debate about who knew how much about what was going on there. I mean, the camps themselves were known in Germany pretty openly, but they didn't know what was going on there. So I mean, pre-war, and I think it might have actually been Dachau, but Dachau was a bit of a joke, a dark joke about, if you got out of line with the party, you'd be sent there for re-education or something like that. But they didn't have the concept of what the final solution was, how awful it was, and anything along that line. There has been a lot of debate about whether or not, if you knew enough about that, could you have sent more bombers to attack the rail lines? Could you have attacked the camps themselves? One of the stories I've come across recently was in a book called Rogue Heroes, which is about the founding of the SAS, and they actually were the ones who went to, I believe it was Bergen-Belsen, which was one of the concentration camps, and that's actually the one where only 2 or 3 weeks before Anne Frank had died. So I mean, obviously they weren't going there specifically to save Anne Frank, but that's something you put in context where if that poor girl had hung on a couple of more weeks, or if things had spread up a couple more weeks, she maybe could have lived. Right. And there's a number of books where, Primo Levi's one I can think of, a couple others on my shelf I'm trying to see right now, but I mean, there's a lot to be said, and I don't think there's ever words that are adequate to describe the horror of that.
What did you think of the documentary's representation? The filmmakers' take on it. What are some of your thoughts regarding the Nazi concentration camps and the filmmakers?
I mean, I think I believe it was Stevens, but I think the attitude that he took to it, and I think I think his approach was at the time correct. I mean, he took it upon himself to be a steward of the truth and a steward of record, a steward of history, and I think he came at the filming of the prisoners and the conditions from a very compassionate, very human point of view, and I think it's a credit to the man to see that. I mean, I don't know how you comprehend that. I mean, obviously, people today have seen some very heinous stuff done to other parts of humanity, but on scale alone, the concentration camps are just overwhelming.
Look, I'm not a professional comedian, but people say I'm a kind of a funny guy, and I have made light of horrible, horrible things, including the Holocaust, as have many other Jews I know. But it's more of a how do you deal with this sort of thing? Comedy can sometimes be, sort of a healing thing. I don't want to. I guess the point that I'm trying to drive home is I don't think it's above reproach in terms of nothing should be made. I mean, fucking Mel Gibson has made fun of the Holocaust. The Spanish Inquisition, just, all kinds of terrible things that have happened to Jewish people, and Jewish people themselves have kidded about it. But in the same breath, never let it, be forgotten that massive amounts of humanity were murdered. I mean, these were not soldiers being shot in a war. These were people being, worked to death and gassed, and there are stories, without getting too depressing, there are stories of people who they thought right up until the very end that they would be saved, and they weren't.
Yeah.
And it's there's time for comedy, but never let it be said that this wasn't one of the more horrifying events in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting you actually brought up a kind of talking about the comedic response to learning of the Holocaust and things like that. And I mean, I actually just saw a trailer for this one a little while ago called The Last Laugh, which is specifically talking to and about the Holocaust with Jewish comedians and how a lot of that had ties of humor and how that was used as kind of a cultural coping mechanism and things along that line.
Right.
And there's been a when you look at something like The Producers by Mel Brooks, like there's something ripe for conversation. It's like, you have a very prominent Jewish comedian making a lot of fun of the Nazis. And there's that certain level of debate. Is it like, are you taking the piss out of them, to use a British term? Are you minimizing them? What's the question, and how do you react to that?
The other thing I wanted to bring up, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for last words. So these fellows come home, and there's a film, that documents post-traumatic stress disorder. They show clips from it. The one guy who's, physically he's lost his hand, and his, these reactions to him, but he's the most well-adjusted of the three, and then you have the other two. One of which utters a line that was really resonant with me. And while I'm not comparing my situation to any of what was experienced in World War II, just the idea of, I've been dealing with this thing now for a while. Now I can't rest. I gotta go make money. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I can't. But if I had a nickel for every time someone told me, "Hey, you have cancer. Why are you working?" And I've had to answer, because if I don't, we're going to be fucking homeless. I don't know where the magical cancer tree with money is, but I haven't found it yet. So until then, yes, I have to work so long as I have energy in my body. And again, not necessarily saying the two situations are comparable, but the idea of, I've spent all these years fighting the Nazis, and now I got to come home, and it's like, well, you should rest. You've had a terrible go of things. It's like, I got to go make money. I'm like, yep, I know how you feel, bud. Then you have the other guy who, Steven Spielberg talks about him, sitting in the plane and, just not being able to let go of the war. We've, since World War II, we've had some movies that have run the gamut of emotions in terms of people coming back from war and not being able to adjust. We've got the modern ones that deal with guys coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. In the 70s, we had guys coming back from Nam, like Rambo. You know, that whole movie is about him, you know, not being able to find his way, you know, and being mistreated. It's just all these different interpretations of the same idea that people come back from these wars. And let's not kid ourselves. If you are a combat troop, at the very least, you are trained to be a killer. You are trained to go to war and kill people and not falter in your shot. And then you have to come back to civilized society where people can be awful and mistreat you and you can't shoot them. It's not how this works. Not how civilized society works. And it's a lot, man. I working in a county jail, we deal with a lot of vets, and many of them do some very terrible things trying to readjust to life here. I don't want to be negative, so I'm not going to talk about some of the things I've seen them do or seen them get charged with, but it's pretty heinous. Suffice it to say, many of them do a lot of drugs, and when they're able to talk to me about it, such as the opportunities for that sort of thing are allowed to happen, you know, they say, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself. There's nothing for me here. Everything I knew and everything I am was over there, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I'd rather just shoot dope and not have to think about it. And it's like, well, it's not for me to tell you that's a terrible decision, not one I agree with, but again, I didn't go over there. But I get it. I understand the perspective. The film itself looks interesting, and you could definitely see the director sort of expressing a lot of emotions and thoughts and psychology in this film, you know, desperately needing to say these things because they're probably keeping him up at night. So those were some of my thoughts about part 3 here. Why don't you go ahead and give your some final thoughts, let things left unsaid, burning desires, etc.
Well, I think relative to Let There Be Light, I think you're absolutely dead on. I mean, you know, I think the one thing that, and I don't know if it was ever stated clearly in the movie, but I think for a lot of these guys, their filmmaking was their catharsis for what they had seen during the war. And right. I mean, I thought one of the interesting side tales of it was also how they reacted with the rest of society. I mean, John Ford doing that one film with John Wayne and just berating him for not knowing how to salute, and for the love of God, John Wayne did not know how to salute. I can't necessarily blame him for that, but you know, that being a reaction to how they dealt with their own war experience and how they dealt with that. I mean, Let There Be Light, I think I'm going to have to find some time and sit down and watch that one, but I mean, it's something, and you're absolutely right. I don't think a lot of medical professionals, and I don't think larger society really grasps what PTSD, as we call it now, or they're actually bringing up a new term for it. It's what is it called? Operational stress injury or something along that line. But it's something. Mm-hmm. It's something that it's changing the terminology to basically go away from this is a syndrome, this is a disorder, to this is an injury that was a result of something happening. Right. Or in some cases, actually going into depending on where you are and depending what literature you read, a lot of the times, some of the people most affected by it weren't necessarily the people on the front lines, but the people just a little bit back of that, where they had less control over their own fate, and that could potentially affect it. I mean, I'm trying not to. I've read a lot about it, but I certainly don't consider myself an expert in any way. So I definitely try and couch my words about it. Talking about kind of the modern side of things, I mean, going back and reading a lot of the stuff by Sebastian Junger, his book War, and his documentaries. So his two books would be ones to read are Tribe and War, and then his documentaries would be Restrepo, Korengal, and then I believe The Last Patrol are three that definitely talk a lot about kind of the modern elements of post-traumatic stress disorder, what guys go through in a modern sense and things like that. And I think even from the footage that I saw, I mean, you know, I found the footage from Let There Be Light to be very affecting.
Anything else?
I think that's about it. I mean, I think it covers it really well. I think I found some other interesting stuff that I didn't know. I never realized, and I think a lot of people would be surprised, that as much as you know, It's a Wonderful Life is a perennial classic at this point, it was an absolute failure when it came out, and you know, I find that to be kind of an interesting bit of information. I think the other thing to talk about more generally is, and I don't know if it's just because of the filmmakers they chose, or specifically or maybe some of the conflicts, or just maybe the difficulty of getting into the theater, is how little information was actually covered about the. I mean, they did have a couple of them, but how little was covered about the Pacific, talking about the experiences there. And I mean, the Pacific was a much different theater. You had a much more fluid front line. It was, and obviously you had the issues of inherent racism, and you had perceptions there, and the Pacific's a harder conflict to follow. And I mean, whether you do that via reading a book, or if you do that watching the HBO series The Pacific, you definitely get the sense that it is a little bit more of a disjointed story to tell, and I think in a lot of ways, once you read enough about it, you get the sense that it very much is.
I think we're good ending it there. Yeah?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Well,
I'll
Andrew,
if you get a chance.
Was this everything you ever dreamed of and more?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Andrew, I want to thank you for suggesting this to me. You know, I said with my podcast this year that I wanted to spend some time being pushed out of my comfort zone, and you know, it's not one, like I said, I would have necessarily sought after. It didn't have one of my 3 featured subject matters: drugs in the ghetto, wrestling, or whores. So you know, it's but despite its lack of drugs in the ghetto, whores, and wrestling, I enjoyed this documentary. I learned a lot, and I enjoyed having this colloquial but intellectual conversation with you. You always bring a lot to the table, and I appreciate having you on. You'll have to let me know when you get another bright idea and you want to come back on and push me out of my comfort zone again.
Thank you very much, Mark. I've been a fan of what you guys have done for years, and I always thoroughly enjoy coming on and kind of talking about my own little, boathouses that I kind of inhabit. I was actually going to ask you, when did we want to do The Crown?
It's a great question. I started watching The Crown, and then I had to stop, and it was one of those ones where I was going to watch it with my wife, but she's terrible when it comes to television. So the longer than short of it is. Let me see. Well, you know what? There's an open space on the calendar, August 29th.
August 29th. Let me check that one. Let me talk to my better half on that one. I'll see if that one can work out.
Yep.
Otherwise, she's seen the whole series. I might actually be able to work her into to watching it, coming on as well.
Here's your homework assignment. I'm trying to not book things on Thursdays if I can help it. I'm trying to keep, Tuesdays, Mondays, source material. Tuesdays is either Damn You Hollywood or TV Party. and then Wednesdays is Metal Hammer of Doom, and then like Thursdays is for catch-ups or on trials and stuff like that. Not that anyone really needs to know any of this, but the point of it is I'm trying to not book myself out like I did the first half of the year, given all that's happened. So my point is with all of this, pick a Tuesday between August and December. Pick a couple of different dates that work for you and your wife if you want, and then I will be able to tell you which of those isn't already something scheduled and works for me. How does that sound?
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay. I'll just, right off the bat, the only available Tuesday I have right now in August is the 29th. But once we get into like September and October and November, it starts to break up a little bit more. There's less movies and stuff to deal with. So, all right, there's your homework assignment. Speaking of which, I know that you have something that you wanted to plug that you didn't get to in our Dunkirk review. So I am going to cede the floor for your plugs.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. So I train at Havoc Esteemed Martial Arts and Havoc JKD in Calgary. You can either find us on Facebook at Esteemed Martial Arts and Havoc JKD or at CalgaryJKD.com. I train there with Sifu Jay Cooper, who is an absolutely phenomenal instructor, has a great deal of martial arts experience, both from the perspective of a martial artist and a longtime law enforcement officer. We train as a part of the Jeet Kune Do Athletic Association under Sifu Harinder Singh Sabharwal. I believe you can find us at a more local location at, I believe it's JKDAA. Let me just check that. JKDathletics.com if you want to find a more local affiliate there. We are upcoming, if you're in the Calgary area or near there. We are having a Combat Master Class seminar on August 26th and 27th with Grandmaster Darren T-Bone from Sarada Eskrima and Professor James Hunden of Universal Martial Arts. I've had a chance to train with Professor Hunden, and he does some amazing stuff. I'm very much looking forward to training with Grandmaster Darren T-Bone for the first time in Sarada. You can find information on that on Facebook through the Havoc page, or check me out on Facebook as well, and you can find me, and I can pass that information along. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks again, Andrew. Loved having you on, buddy. I'll be anxious to talk to you again. If you think of something else besides The Crown, will you let me know and we'll talk offline. All right, folks. Next week, the bitch is back. Charlize Theron. So awful. Atomic Blonde, based on the graphic novel that they optioned and made into a movie. It was, of course, The Coldest Winter. We'll be talking about The Coldest Winter this Monday on the Source Material. On August 1st, we'll be reviewing Atomic Blonde. The Metal Hammer of Doom will finally be getting around to Unleash the Arches. And then finally, on Thursday, see how I said I didn't want to keep doing Thursday podcasts? Yep, I've loaded myself up once again. We're doing an on trial. Sean and I will be back, and we're going to do a Charlize Theron movie that could use a good prosecution and defense. The Italian Job from 2003 with Mark Wahlberg. Mark Wahlberg.
I was about to say, you guys have gone 2 for 2 for on trials with Mark Wahlberg in the last little while.
I'll tell you a secret. He's our special friend. No, I don't know. It's just, it just happened to go that way. I hope you enjoyed our Planet of the Apes on trial. That was a lot of fun. It was one of those where, I don't know if actual lawyers, like the trial lawyers, go through this where, they know they have an uphill battle and they don't really know what they're going to say, and then they just open up their mouth and out, and just out it all comes. They just vomit all this material, these arguments. I mean, I'm sure it's not necessarily just like that, but I have to say with the Planet of the Apes, I went into that going, yes, it's a shit movie, but that's all I really have to say about it. And then it was like, okay, I got to talk now, and I went on for like 20 minutes, just tearing this movie to shreds. Totally impromptu, totally off the cuff. just no preparation. I mean, when back at the beginning of the year, we did Big Trouble in Little China, and I love that movie. So I really had to sit down and take notes and really deconstruct the movie in order to find things to pick on. And then, over the course of the year, just for one reason or another, I've been a little bit more off the cuff. And then, with Planet of the Apes, I was like, I didn't take notes or anything. It took me 2 tries to get through it. I fell asleep the first time. And then that microphone turned on, and I was just like, hey, fuck this movie, and here's why. So apparently I have a talent for this sort of thing.
I got to say, I mean, I think I probably had a chance to listen to just about every episode of Long Road to Ruin. Thoroughly enjoyed that show, and I think I've said this online, but you and Sean have really just picked up the ball with On Trial and run with it. It's a treat to listen to.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's a much better format for our two personalities. We are both very strong personalities, and given the subject matter and our desire to talk, it allows for a much better listening experience, as near as I can tell. And I'm glad you've enjoyed it. All right, now that I've said all that, as I said, this is a split 7-inch, so we're not going to use our usual outro theme music. We're going to do the Because You Made Me theme music to go out tonight, because why the hell not? Ladies and gentlemen, for Andrew Graham, the paragon of Canadian virtue, our man with a Canadian plan, he's the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.
Once upon a time, there was a new crossover that refused to play by the rules. It flipped the script and made all the others look like fools. Featuring styling that's sexier by far and handles like a rock star. Introducing the first ever Toyota C-HR.
Enjoy agile handling in the body of a seductive crossover that comes with standard 18-inch alloy wheels. The first ever Toyota C-HR. The perfect ride to spin your own tail. Toyota. Let's go places.
With free next-day delivery from Staples, you can run your business like a pro. You can guarantee the marketing department that they'll get their supplies tomorrow and guarantee the accounting department that they'll be delivered free. With free next-day delivery, you'll have the ability to move deadlines up and adjust budgets down. Go to Staples.com and get the office essentials you need delivered next day for free. Staples. It's pro time. Orders over $49.99 placed by 5 p.m. Excludes weekends and holidays. Eligible items only.